and have everything from your office transmitted for the next day or so.
Yeah. So I think we can start. I would like well, let's start. So welcome to the core working group. We are doing the second IETF that we do it remotely, but all of you or most of you have participated on the interim meeting, so this is no surprise. I'm Jaime Jimenez, and there you have also Marco. We are the chairs of the working group, and well, we will be handling the session today. I'll be passing the slides. I guess you, Marco, will be checking on the Jabber, right?
Yeah.
And we have the 2 minute takers. We were Niklas and
Ivo.
Thank you very much, Ivo and Niklas. The schedule. So, well, let's start with it. We assume that people have read the drafts. Most of them, anyway, have been for quite a while, so probably you are very familiar with them. Yeah, so basically the IPR applies to this video conferencing too, the RFC 8179. We won't be using blue sheets because it's automatically taken by Miteco. I would like the minute takers, actually, if they could just put the number of total participants at the top, that would be great. It keeps changing, so just keep an eye on it so that we remember later on. The note well also applies, which kind of guide the way the IETF works, but also kind of like general behavior between participants, which is to be nice and so on. Yeah, I mean, please have a look if you don't know it already. So for today, we have what seems like a very packed session, but actually slots are rather small and some of the items are very mature. Some of the drafts are very mature, so we are gonna go through them rather quickly, I believe. And we have another 10-minute slot that we didn't have before due to some rescheduling. So we will have flex time and we'll have discussion time, but we will try to keep an eye on the time. As I mentioned before, the Miteco will close anyways after 5 minutes, so it's not like we can continue like all the times 20 minutes after the meeting has ended, right? So, well, the agenda for today, I guess you don't need to look at it too much in detail. The one on Friday, here you have it as well, mostly CoreConf, GroupConf, and ad hoc related drafts. GroupConf cluster has quite a few there, as you can see. And we will also have whatever spills over from today, which I hope is nothing, on the next Friday too. Now some time for agenda bashing. If you want to say something or change some of the items for today.
2 slots around just so that you know when we get to the slides, because it will be easier because Research Directory will be referencing ERT.
Sounds good. Okay. So without further ado, I can just go into the intro for the working group. So, oh yeah, sorry, practicalities. Yes, we will use Miteco. No need to write your name. The meeting is automatically recorded when we start it. If you want to say something, just write mic : on the Jabber, and yeah, and do we really have relaying of questions if everything is remote? Anyways, I guess if you don't have a microphone, somebody can speak on your behalf, but I guess we'll just work with your own microphone and you will say whatever you have to say. On the microphone thing, we don't do queuing today, as some have requested. That we will just simply click on the the second microphone button on the right side, and your voice will be relayed. No need to queue. Just try not to interrupt during the presentation unless it's something important. So for core, we have 2 new RFCs, the fetch and patch for SNML and the more units. So congratulations to the authors. Applause. Good work. Yeah, I mean, they have been recently published, and I believe we already are, at least for the more units, we already have it in OMA, so I hope others start adopting them too. For resource directory, it has been recently sent to ISG. It's on ISG evaluation. For stateless, I believe there were few comments left from Benjamin Kaduk, I believe, and Eric. I had some notes. Maybe I should check them. Sorry for that. Yes, from Eric Klein. But hopefully, once those are clear, the draft can move forward. I mean, Klaus will need to send another draft there. Maybe you can give an update later on your slot as well. And same thing for RD, for Christian. On post-working group last call, so we have the dev URN, which is pretty much done. There was some discussion on whether the draft should be informational or standards track. I believe Barry settled it and provided some comments also, so new draft is needed. And then, yeah, Echo Request app is one of the write-ups that Marco will have to be doing. Same thing with dev URN, actually. Another Shepherd write-up will be required after the new ID is sent and the new draft is sent. And then for OSCO GroupCom, we also have working on last comments to process from last week. And also, very important, we have the COMI cluster on working on last call, which ends this week. Hopefully, we can discuss them in the next Friday meeting. So if you have anything left on your mind, and if you haven't checked the latest versions, now is really the best time to do that, please. All right, so that's the update. We are still on time, and I will switch to Christian. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. On echo request tag and token processing, next slide, please. And actually, two next, because it's just the intro slide. So this hasn't been presented at a full IETF meeting for about a year, but has gone through a number of steps, which I would just run through quickly. So this has passed a working group last call. We got a number of feedback points in that, and also in the post-working group last call reviews that we've received. One of them was that the amplification mitigation should receive more details. So now, we're giving numbers for that based on the numbers that are in Quick. That is, don't send more than 3 times what has been sent to you, which in practice means that you get about 150 octets in the request payload. And this is now also updated, like the token processing is also updating RC7252, because it's basically the only practical way that is currently known to do amplification mitigation in co-op, other than sending tiny block sizes. There were 2 small changes on the echo side. That is, we now do allow shorter values, but still recommend that. I mean, previously the option was limited to 4 to something bytes. Now it can even be 1 byte long, but that's still only for use cases where you don't put randomness in there. Klaus made a very important point about the architectural compatibility with REST-OLS with the REST architecture in general. So now it may be processed by proxies, as we already allowed it for cross proxies. So previously we said that core proxies must just forward it. Now they may interpret it, but they still can't deteriorate the freshness properties. So they will usually not want to do this unless they have anything to add there. On the request tag, we don't claim anymore that this solves all the problems of stateless proxies. We previously, my previous assumption was that this could be just tag it on there and things work. It doesn't, but we don't really want to do all the all the detail work of when and where it can be applied in this document. So it's now just a pointer to this can solve a particular some of those problems, but not all of them. The document got restructured a bit in that it's now having dedicated introduction sections to the various parts. Got added privacy and security considerations, especially mitigating the issue that someone might abuse an echo option like cookies, and now the client may forget them at any point in time, so that's not too much of an issue anymore. And now we even have concrete numbers to suggest to IANA. So that's about my summary of what happened so far. And I'm looking forward to reading the Shepherd write-up and seeing this progress. Any comments directly on this? Then I'd like to jump to the basically three slides back, which is the update on the resource directory. So that as well is actually past the working group. Next slide, please. There was one change that looks much larger than we usually have at this stage. That is the section on security policies. Previously, that had pretty detailed guides on what exactly is protected in a resource directory, and turned out my impression is that we let ourselves just be pushed by the review process, and just added considerations there rather than taking a step back and say, okay, what can be protected? And it turned out this changes depending on how you use a resource directory. So where we previously had, how is this protected? Now it says, what can be protected? And rather than having hard rules with details that we might get wrong, and did get wrong, we could have fixed those details, but the interims showed that this is not really the direction where we want this document. So this is now generalized. And as per a recent mail, Russ, who did the Gen Out review, seems to be very happy with those changes, with minor details. Also, during those reviews, it turns out that there's a few points where we should really use echo in there, for example, for amplification mitigation, and to protect clients that are not actually trying to register. And those are now in there, and depending on the sequence in which those documents will hit the RC editor, will be a non-normative forward reference or a more formal reference to what it already is part of an updated co-op process. Questions on that? Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Any comments on the echo, on the shepherding? Anything to highlight?
No, not after this revision. I plan to complete the write-up and ask for publication actually soon after this IETF week.
Okay, so we have had, for those who are not aware, we have a few interims among, well, some of them had to do with authorization and RD and the use of RD. But we didn't really came with anything that could be applied to resource directory as it is today. So I guess we will just continue with the current state and address the few ISG comments left, if there were any, and just get it done and ship it.
Yeah. So there's some ongoing exploration on how which authorization models make sense for resource directory, but that's really out of scope for the original specification. So I think this can be done in things like how to use AIF with resource directory.
Mm-hmm. Which we have later today as well. AIF, we can discuss it as well. Okay, thank you, Christian. Anybody, any comments, or shall we move on to the next topic? Okay, if not, then Thomas couldn't be here today with us, but Klaus and I, as co-authors, can present problem details. I believe it was going to be Klaus this time. Klaus, are you there? I mean, I know you're there, but
First up.
the audio is a bit dim, I think.
Okay.
I cannot hear you. I don't know if others have the same issue. I'll mute myself just in case.
And what about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, now it's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So problem details. Of course, this is not details of problems, but a draft that is intended to provide a payload format for errors in co-op-based APIs. Next slide. We have, before this IETF meeting, submitted -01, which is a rebuilding of the original -00 from the ground up. This time, we have focused on expressing these problem details and or error details exclusively using Coral. In 00, this was just an exploration in the appendix. And based on the feedback that us also authors have received, we have now made this the only on primary way to express these problem details. And there are a few open things that we want to fix, but didn't have time to do before the IETF meeting. So this 01 version includes just the content where we were really sure how we would do it. And we have a GitHub repository with a bunch of issues. And those issues we want to work on in the following draft revisions. And that's not included in this current -01. But the idea is that we have basically a core functionality that allows people to use this payload format to describe their errors. And then we have a bunch of extensions in mind for different use cases that are optional to use. Next slide. Okay, I was getting ahead of myself. So yes, we have this base or core set of fields that includes, for example, error type, description, and human readable error description. And then we are planning to have these extensions for a number of use cases, and that includes tracing, forwarding errors that were received from third parties, and so on. As I said, we have this GitHub repository with the open issues, and if anyone has a new use case, please feel free to open a new issue. Or if you're interested in working on one of these existing use cases, please chime in the GitHub repository. Next slide. And again, I was getting ahead of myself. The major update of this 01 version is it's now Coral all the way. Next slide. We have one big topic that we have been shifting around a bit, and that might be a bit an elephant in the room. And that is, how do we generate identifiers for our problem types and for our extensions? And of course, Coral has a way to define new vocabulary, and that includes the use of URIs as identifiers, as it's common practice in the semantic web and JSON-LD and similar technologies. And at the same time, the 00 version of the problem details draft had its own custom scheme to define new identifiers. Next slide. So what we want from these identifiers is, of course, that they are very compact. We want to make these problem details available to constrained devices, and we don't want to bloat the payload with large identifiers. So these URIs are actually too verbose, and we need something more compact. And we also have other requirements like low barrier to entry. People should not be required to register any application-specific error type, for example, in an IANA registry. For protocol elements, it's perfectly valid and simple for RFC writers to register new entries in IANA registries. But for average application developers, it's just too much to ask to register every problem code in a registry. And we also have some other requirements that are outlined in this GitHub issue. And you might want to ask, why don't we just use the current way that Coral offers, or the way that Thomas originally proposed in his 0.0 version. And the answer is both approaches have some minor disadvantages that make them slightly non-optimal. So we are really hoping if we can improve on those initial proposals and find something that is maybe a few % better than what we have right now. Next slide. So we started looking already, for example, last time in Singapore at the last physical IETF meeting, and to approaches. So we looked into, for example, the SIDs of CoreConf that have been developed in the core working group. But of course, naming things in a distributed way is one of these two hard problems of computer science. So there are tons of solutions, each designed for different use cases, ranging from centralized registries like IANA registries or Bluetooth registries, to hierarchical schemes like ISBN numbers and so on. And then, of course, we have the huge ecosystem of different software packages like in Go or JavaScript and .NET and so on, where they all had to solve the problem of globally unique identifiers for applications and application elements. So we started looking into these ID generation schemes, and we are hoping that we can find some creative way that would also work well for Corel and problem types specifically. If any one of you has an idea how we should generate IDs, please speak up or contribute to the GitHub issue. Next slide. That was it. Yes, that was the last slide. Any questions, comments, feedback? Carsten.
So one of the new ideas that is being tested right now is to couple IANA registration with a GitHub repository. So you can just do a pull request to the repository and you get registered. I think that that would be a nice way to handle registries.
Yeah, that is definitely something that we have on our radar. We are thinking that maybe even that might be too much to ask. If we set errors in co-op APIs roughly equal to exceptions in, say, Java or Python, and you would ask developers to register every exception type or error type or class in a Java program with a registry, even through GitHub repository, that might be too much to ask. Christian.
I think there should be some kind of hierarchical part in this. So maybe I think we can ask developers of a particular piece of software to register something somewhere if it's as easy as a pull request, but then they should get some kind of namespacing below there. So just out of the blue, maybe if we manage to find a way to set something like base URIs, they can register something that can be expressed compactly as a base for the next part, and then have their own short identifiers for their exceptions, something like that.
Then we run immediately into questions like what happens when the original registrant goes away? How do we maintain those namespaces and so on? So there's a broad range of questions, and I would like to very much invite you to take a look at our GitHub issue and chime in. I saw Jim on the list showing up.
I have One of the things I was looking at, I've started playing with this a bit, and one of the things I think we need to talk about is both privacy and security in terms of applications reporting errors, because it turns out that that's actually going to be a very important thing.
I think there is something on that in the problem details for HTTP RFC. Do we need to go beyond that? Do you have something specific in mind?
Did you really expect me to go read that draft?
Okay, maybe we can take it to the list or into a GitHub issue. Thanks. Any further questions, comments on problem details?
Okay. Well, thank you, Klaus, for the presentation and for the work. Then we move to the next, which is DynLink. Bill, are you there? There you go.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, good. Okay, hello everybody.
We don't see you.
Excuse me?
We don't see you though, if you want to share video, but it's optional.
I share video here.
That's okay.
That's fine. I have video too, so just give me a second. Does this work? Leave video queue. I'm okay with sharing video, but I'm not entirely certain what the button is for video.
Try again. Click once more on the video.
So I just have the button for the.
Yeah, it should be fine. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. So yeah, we have a very short update on what's happening with DynLink. So DynLink is right now at version 11. Could you put it to the next slide, please? Right. So there has been substantial changes in DynLink going forward from the previous version. So most of it had to do with restructuring and organizing the different aspects that DynLink was trying to promote. And from version 08 to up to version 010, we have actually restructured it so that we introduce the observe attributes first, and then the dynamic links, and then the binding table implementation. And then we have been able to incorporate all the feedback received and the clarifications for those. Then next slide, please. Yes. So from version 10 to version 11, there hasn't been very many changes. However, a small group of people have been meeting for the last 2 times. Some of them are here. There has been, Carsten has been there. The core chairs have been there, Klaus, Christian, and Michael, and as well as Ellen Soloway from Qualcomm. And we have been discussing various things. So I kind of just wanted to crystallize a few of these things and tell you what's happening in DynLink moving forward. And basically there are just 3 different updates. The first one, which is an editorial change that's going to happen, is due to the fact that in the current draft, a lot of the observed notifications, the language that is being used gives the impression that we're reporting values and we're doing a lot of message transfers and so on. And there was a feedback that we should probably be looking at this more in terms of RESTful state transfers. So that literally affects all the observe attributes that we are defining. And so there's going to be a substantial editorial change just to alter that language, and hopefully that brings it in line with the RESTful state transfers. In so doing, we also had some work that Klaus and Jaime did. If you don't mind moving to the next slide, please. That Klaus raised, which was about the behavior of PMAX. And this the behavior is actually affected if you're considering a simple client-server interaction between a co-op server and a co-op client. That's not too bad, but when you start introducing proxies in between, then the behavior of PMAX may not necessarily be reflected to what the client really wants, because there might be a chance that because the values don't really change, the proxies do not really give the current value. I do not know if we have actually reached a consensus on how to proceed forward with this. We have had a discussion about whether we can actually let Pmax influence the server's max age, so that whenever you actually have the data being expired, then the origin server will send a new notification. Okay, next slide, please. And the final thing that's happening right now has been a proposal from Alan from OMA to support 2 new attributes that are actually already specified in the library N2M specifications right now, called EP-min and EP-max. And OMA is using these 2 attributes for reporting and basically to do device configuration in order to do sampling. So EP-min, which is minimum evaluation period, is used so that after the expiry of EP-min, the device may immediately perform an evaluation, and then to get the value, and then EP-max is the converse. So and if both of them are defined, then EP-min must be less than EP-max. So if you want to follow the discussion about whether this should be inside DynLink or not, there's a link there in the slide. You can just click on it, and it'll bring you right there to the DynLink issues. I do not know if Ellen is here or if Michael is here today. I saw them earlier in the ASDF meeting, but I'm not sure if they're here. But I thought this would be a good time to solicit some feedback from anybody if you actually have some comments on the working group whether EP-min and EP-max should be inside the DynLink draft. Carsten.
So I'm not particularly interested in this in these additional parameters, EP-min, EP-max. Do we have any IPR disclosures that we have to look at in this context?
Yes, there actually are IPR disclosures. I think they have been declared on DynLink by Qualcomm. So that's one factor, yes.
But they have been declared before the EP-min, EP-max values were under consideration.
Let me check quickly. I think it was. I noticed it after Alan raised the issue on the mailing list. But of course, the current draft itself does not contain EP-min, EP-max, so it has not been put into the DynLink yet. So okay. The IPR is raised against the current draft, which doesn't have EP-min and EP-max.
Right. Because I think that having some IPR declaration against this document would reduce its usefulness considerably. Okay, that's probably not something we can discuss here, but I think we have to keep it in mind when we continue the discussion of this.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to comment on that maybe we don't want to discuss IPR issues as such. And in fact, I think the discussion on the functioning of Pmax and the way it is intended is actually more interesting, because it's about whether we want co-op to be about transferring the state or about message passing. And the discussion happened on the other meetings, but it didn't happen in core. So I was just, I thought it would be nice to onboard everybody else on the topic. I have 2 people in the queue, by the way. If I'm, sorry, Bill.
Yeah. So I just wanted to respond. Yeah. So I just want to respond to what Jaime said. Sorry, Barry and Ari. So in fact, we can actually see almost a categorization of 2 different kinds of observed attributes right now. Pmax, EP-min, and EP-max appear to be attributes that are being used to configure the device. So I just wanted to highlight that for reporting.
And basically it's about the proxy behavior. But let's go into the queue. So Ari, go ahead, please.
So Ari here, I just wanted to comment that given that lightweight NVM is probably the biggest user of the dynamic mechanism that we know of today, it would be very natural to have those capabilities like what NVM is using as part of this document. I think that would make a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Barry?
Okay, this is Barry Leba. Just clarification on discussing the IPR issue. And I'm sure Karsten and you know this, I want to make sure everybody understands. It's not appropriate to discuss the IPR itself and whether it's valid or applies or whatever, but it is absolutely reasonable for the working group to discuss in any context whether IPR on a particular document affects the progress of that document in the working group. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that.
Oh, thank you, Barry. That's a very good clarification. I think actually as far as discussion goes, I would like to split the two topics because it's completely different, the one on the Pmax and Pmin from the EPmax and EPmin. If we could just maybe for this session right now, focus on the Pmax and Pmin rather than the other one, would that be okay if people have comments on this and if they understand the problem and the implications? Go ahead. No need to ask for permission. Just remember to say your name before, and that's it. State your name and just go ahead.
Christian, I'd just like to point out that as a kind of third issue, I do have some concerns about the structure of the binding site, which is not something that changed in the recent versions. That still are yet to be addressed, and I think I can even help writing that up. But it's a different topic, just on the part of things that are open on DynLink. This still exists.
Yes. So just to respond to Christian, yes, that's exactly right. So there's the other part of DynLink, which is basically outside the observer attributes, which talks about the binding table and the link bindings. Indeed, yes.
All right. Anybody else? Any more comments? Any more thoughts?
Perhaps Jaime, I could just finish the last slide and then
yes,
we can take it. And one more. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so that's just to get back to track, so I can we can go to the discussion part. So right now we're in draft 11, and draft 12 will reflect those editorial changes to understand that we are going to be discussing the notification via reflecting the state transfers. And after that, we are going to be able to address the other things, which are basically about Pmax and whether EPmin and EPmax should be incorporated or not. Also, we plan to continue discussions in small, kind of like using Jitsi after IETF108. So we have not been very forthcoming yet to advertise that, but please let us know if you would like to receive an invitation, and you can join us also for that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I mean, regarding invitations, I'm just thinking that at the end of the day, the authors can choose how they want to work, right? Like they can limit the audience or not. But if it is about having higher attendance or just inviting everybody that may want to join, if there's no problem to the progress of the draft, I think we can just send the Jitsi invitations also on the mailing list, and people can choose to join or not. And then we will also have, after the summer, we will start again with the interims, and I'm sure we can dedicate some time to this in one of the interims.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So any more comments to the drafts? The draft? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. So next is the CNML cluster. Just to check quickly, how are we on time, Marco?
1 minute behind.
All right, fair enough. So we still have remember we have the 15 minutes flex time. Yeah. So let's go with this. I think it's Karsten, right? Karsten, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have talked about CineML versions before, but just to refresh, I put in 6 slides that we will run through very quickly. So next slide. CineML defines a version number that is currently version 10 or 1.0, depending on how you read it. It's an integer. And CineML doesn't really define how we are going to handle this version number. It just says if the version number is increased, we are doing an RFC updating the existing CineML RFC. Next slide. And the objective, of course, is to get extensibility. So new specifications will add features. And sometimes this can be done using the existing extension points. And sometimes we need to actually add something that people just need to know to process the CineML. And a version number is a unidirectional declaration. So the originator of the CineML says a particular set of features is needed to process this CineML pack. And version numbers have a total order. So usually a version number n+1 includes all features of version number n, except of course for features that are deprecated. But once you deprecate features, you get problems with integrating packs from different versions. Next slide. So essentially the general principle here is version numbers are not always the best way to handle a situation. We have had that discussion in a lot of contexts now, and there are different applications for version numbers. Some of them are revision numbers, some of them are actually rolled up features, and so I don't want to repeat this discussion. We have a way to declare individual features using must understand fields. So that is already there. So people who don't want to use version numbers can use that. But on the other hand, of course, when you have to have half a dozen of these must understand fields at the beginning of a pack, that becomes less useful as a compact representation of some sensor measurement. Next slide, please. So the great idea that Ari had was, aren't version numbers actually numbers that can be interpreted as binary numbers? And can't we put some features we actually care about into that version number? So the version 10 we have at the moment is 1010 in binary. So it has some features 1 and 3 that we don't need to define. But on top of that, we can define additional features. And when we thought about evolving CineML to actually sometimes allowing secondary units, maybe that could be feature 4. So this was what motivated doing this work on handling version numbers in CineML. Now the feature code or the version numbers in JSON are limited to be 53-bit integers. If we consider version number 0 to 4, feature bit 0 to 4 taken, we would have 48 bits remaining. Next slide. Yeah, so I just said 53. I think some of us still remember that that was an evil number. But maybe the 53 or the 48 left is really all we need, because we still have the must understand for stuff that is not used widely. We can really limit the way these bits get allocated. So if we do not allocate more than 10% of the remaining set per year, then we have quite some time before we have to think about something new. Maybe we don't even need 10% of the remaining set per year. Next slide. So this is the background, and IETF 00 defines this feature system, creates a registry under the CineML registry for the features. reserves feature code 023 and makes the whole thing specification required with a frugality manner to the designated expert. So it spells out what the expert should check so we don't give away all these 48 code points in the next week. And finally, it registers feature code 4 for the use of secondary units. So this is now a working group draft. It has the adoption call behind it. It is actually reference from 8798, which was mentioned at the start. And there haven't been any technical changes. Next slide, please. So I think this is ready for working group last call. Maybe we want to get 1 or 2 reviews so we can iron out some of the nits there. And then we should process these reviews, check if we are done, and do a working group last call. So one thing we could do right now is ask for people who would be willing to do reviews. And to do this efficiently, can just everybody who wants to do a review request audio? Then we will see you. We don't have to process the request. We can just see you are there and you are interested in doing a review. Bill is interested. Bill is the only one interested. We might need a second one. Okay, so maybe we need to take that to the list. Okay, that was Sentinel versions. Any other comments on this?
Thank you, Carsten. I actually read the draft, and I think it's quite mature and quite clear. I mean, it's not that complex. My only 2 thoughts, maybe on the deprecation side, do the authors have an opinion on how often will it happen that some features are deprecated?
No, that's really hard to say. Predictions are always hard to make, especially about the future.
True. All right, no crystal ball there then. I'm just wondering, like, about the implications if some features start being deprecated, but yeah, it's not a big thing.
Well, the nice thing about the bit field is that you can simply not use the feature, so you don't have to roll up this in the version number.
Yeah, and I think the other one, I mean, we can also check whether the expert can actually do this kind of allocation mechanism, like to make sure that no more than 10% per year. I don't expect, to be honest, I don't think a lot of features will pop up every year, but who knows? Okay, so I'm totally fine with working group last call for this document. I don't know if others have more comments, but of course we need a few more reviews. We can take it to the list. If no one volunteers, of course the chairs can also do some other reviews as working group participants in order to help move this forward.
Can you write up yours?
After my vacation, yeah.
Sounds good.
I can do a review, no problem. I think I might also be the shepherd on this one. I don't remember right now, but since I'm familiar with more units, that would be fine for me to do.
Okay.
So minute takers, please take notes of Bill and me as potential reviewers for the draft, for the draft, and that we would like to do working group last call after that happens. So, any more comments on this one? All right, so let's move on to the next one. Carsten, you still.
Okay, data value content format indication. Ari, do you want to do that or should I do that? Ari is asleep. Okay, so I will do it. Data value content format indication, next slide, is essentially about the fact that we can have binary data in a SNML record, and sometimes it's not so useful to have binary data without knowing what it means. So the idea is to have a content format indication or CG field to indicate the content format of the data in the SNML record. Next slide. So for instance, the data that comes from an NFC reader might be declared to be content format 60. So the person who sees the error on this slide gets a beer from me. And so we know how to interpret the space 64 encoded field, in this case as CBOR. Next slide. So the last update, the -2 version, is different from -1 in that we essentially removed the city underscore version. That would have been a must understand version of the same field, but it turns out that we don't really have good answers for, that's an old slide. Anyway, we don't really have good answers for the interaction in the resolution process between two versions of a field. One is must understand and the other is not must understand, because the base versions start to fight against each other. So instead of trying to solve that problem, which is probably possible with some usage guidelines, we decided to just get rid of it and say, yeah, it would have been nice to have a must understand version, but that adds complexity, and let's not do that. So unless anybody thinks this is really important to have a must understand version of the content format field, the authors believe this is now ready for working group loss call.
Good riddance.
Somebody says something.
Sorry, Christian. Good riddance.
Thank you.
So how about reviews? Do we have any volunteers? Do we need them for this draft? Just like with the versions.
Well, I think it's just one data field, so
yeah,
it's not changing the CNML architecture like the previous one did. So going into the working class call right away would work for me.
Okay, so
Same
Marco,
for me. Same for me.
Okay, then let's issue a working group last call already, and let's do the usual couple of weeks, if that's okay, unless there is some urgency. No, I guess. All right, so let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any last minute comments? I'm hearing that everybody's very quiet. So I'm just wondering if people are following the discussions, or maybe it's too late actually, or too early in the US at the moment, or in Europe, it's too hot. Maybe, I don't know. All right, Francesca says is following, no comments. David is also following. Thank you, David. All right, then let's do the working last call in the 2 weeks, and let's move on to the next draft. Thank you, Karsten.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have the blockwise for the DOTS working group. This has been ongoing on the interims, and we have been maybe postponing the adoption of this document, and hopefully we will get it adopted on this IETF. And just for the benefit of the group, I would like the presentation to happen. All right, thank you, Jim, for a comment. So, John, whenever you want, the floor is yours. There is no video, I assume, or?
Yeah, that is correct. I just tried to start it up and it came back and said some error and gave up.
You want to try again, just in case? Video really enhances the interaction.
I understand that, but let's try. I'm getting
sometimes it breaks. Nah, yeah, I get an error too. Okay, yeah, let's just go ahead.
It doesn't like me. Okay, so the DOTS, which is distributed denial of service open threat signaling, creates a challenge in environments where there are distributed denial of service attacks, and we need to maintain communications between different components so that we can try and mitigate those DDoS attacks. So next slide, please. Okay, so we're talking about large body packets, or large body being transferred in multiple packets, and that gives us headaches in lossy environments. And so we've come up with an alternative to block 1 and block 2, which is the block 3 and block 4. Similar semantics, but some additional sort of changes in there. So next slide, please. Okay, so here just is a sort of simple graphic of the environment. You have some client sitting in some enterprise somewhere. You have some mitigation services out in the cloud, and we need to be able to request mitigation from the enterprise type client. But part of the challenge is that the pipe or the connection out to the internet is being overloaded with traffic coming inbound, so there is packet loss. But once we can get mitigation requests out, we then should be able to just control what's happening with the pipe, so we can at least get back to some reasonable communications that are taking place. And we have an RFC out there for dealing with the actual DOTS communication, the DOTS protocols. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we're looking at when using CoAP, we need to transfer a large body of multiple payloads. We need to be able to handle packet loss and have some sort of recovery mechanism. We cannot rely on getting responses. So we send a request out. We cannot guarantee that we're going to get a response back because of the pipe overloading. And at that point, the request response model just basically lockstepping fails. We're also interested in being able to do fast transfers for large bodies so that we just don't hang around for the round trip times. And we also, because of that, we're looking for some packet interchange reduction. Design goal is that we utilize other CoAP options wherever possible, and that we kind of maintain the existing CoAP ethos of how things are done. So we don't want to break the CoAP model at all, but we just want to be able to streamline things that are taking place. Next slide. So the solution is we come up with block 3, which has very similar to block 1, but some usage examples, likewise block 3, block 4. And there we just got the thing sitting on there, and we expect it to be OS-core class E and class U, just to be within the encrypted or without the encrypted as things stand there. Next slide, please. So the block 3. The intention behind here is that the block 3 can send out the packets without expecting a response until we get to the end of the data that's been pushed out. So therefore, things like the 231 continue, we no longer require, and we're only really looking for a single response at the end of the transmission of the set of blocks that make up the body. Use of none is recommended because we're not looking for the ACK coming back, but alternatively, if people want to, they can increase nstart so that multiple packets can be in the pipeline of confirmable type. We need to make use of the request tag CoAP options so that we can make sure that this is this set of block of this body that's being sent, and if for any reason we then move on and send another body of data to the same resource, we know the server is able to differentiate between what's taking place. So we need to make use of the request tag that has been brought up earlier in this meeting. Each request payload has to have a unique token, again, just maintaining the token type stuff for request response. And we've come up with a new missing payloads response, which indicates these particular packets have been missed. So the server says, I have seen packets 139, I'm missing the rest, that kind of stuff. We're also very concerned about creating our own DDoS problems by what we're doing here. So we have congestion control in place. So we've said every max payload, which is a default of 10, we just pause and check that everything is still working right before we send the next burst of 10 packets in the single direction. And each body is subject to the RS-7252 probing rate. Again, just congestion control. Next slide, please. So the actual missing payloads, CBOR encoded, the content format, we're coming up with a new content format, and we have the descriptive language down there below, which basically is what is the request tag and what are the missing block list. Next slide, please. So an example, block 3 example here, we can just see the first basically 5 lines is a put request, the 4 blocks go out, and then there's an acknowledgement saying, yep, I got them. Or in the failure case, all 4 put out, and then there's a response saying, well, I'm missing a couple. So those 2 are retried, and then 1 still fails, and then retry, and then the actual transfer is complete. Next slide, please. Block 4 likewise is similar to block 2. If you issue the get or a fetch with block 4, that will trigger a block 4 response as opposed to a block 2 if the size of data being returned is sufficiently large. and missing blocks indicated by get with multiple block false if the client realizes that he's seen a couple of missing, well, he hasn't seen a couple of blocks, he can then just issue a get request with those multiple missing blocks. Again, recommended none, but we could increase end start. And here we make use of the existing ETAG option, unique per body, to make sure that we're getting the right data back for the right stuff. And again, we have the same congestion control in place as we had for the block 3. Next slide, please. Working with observe gets a little bit more complicated. The same observe value needs to be returned in all the block 3 returned responses. The reason being that it could be that the initial block number 0 gets lost and only block 1, 2, or 3 come along, and we need to know what the observed value is for tracking purposes. The same token is used for the entire set of responses because they were triggered by a single token in the initial get request. But if there are missing blocks, then we need to have a new token for the missing block sets, and that token must be used as part of the retry response, pseudo responses. But the next observe that wakes up will then go back to using the originally set up token. Next slide, please. Example here with it working. So we do a get with the block 4, we get the 4 packets or whatever, how many packets come back, and then somewhere downstream an observer is triggered, and we get the 4 packets coming back with the appropriate observed tag updated and using ETAG, etc. Next slide, please. So here we have an observe triggered, but we're missing several of the packets coming back at the client end, and so the client wakes up, realizes, he issues a request for the missing blocks. In this case, we just get one of the 2 blocks back. He realizes there's still one outstanding. He requests it, and then everything is complete. Next slide, please. I haven't seen the next slide yet. Yeah, so this particular draft has been discussed at 2 interim meetings. Out of that, we've taken on board a lot of comments, worked things through, adjusted things slightly, simplified essentially the design that's taking place, and tried to make bring things in line with everything that's taking place there. And so, the final request is, can we move forward and adopt this as a working group document? I see Christian's wanting to ask something.
Yeah, also first of all, apologies for not having sent the review that I've promised earlier. One thing that I'm primarily missing about this is a clarification on where this wants to go in terms of either being a generic successor to Blockwise that addresses the issues that you need, or whether it's supposed to be a bespoke solution to the particular problem of Blockwise not being able to do everything that you need in this particular situation. Because there's a bunch of, if it's supposed to be the generic solution, there's a bunch of things that would come up, like this doesn't handle non-atomic Blockwise requests at all, which the original Blockwise can. So I think some clarification on that point would be a good starting thing for a next step. Sure. And then we can talk about things like proxy traversal, still existing layer mix-ups or mix-ups, layering violations, or possible ways to separate things better. But I think the direction is the paramount question.
Okay, the direction, I see it in addition to the block 1 and block 2, because there are certain, as you point out, there are certain qualities that they have which are not there in block 3, block 4, but it's been optional set of options. The way what we've got in the draft is that if for any reason someone in the chain or the far end doesn't understand the new options, then we just revert back to the old options.
Okay, so I queued up to say essentially the same things that Christian said, but let me also add, I think this is a good solution. Now, of course, it still needs a few nits being ironed out, but we can do this while it is a working group document. So I support doing the adoption call now, and then I support the adoption of this document. And I think what we need to work on as a working group is making sure that all the components of CoAP are really used correctly, like the whole token thing and so on. This draft doesn't really have to say very much about tokens, but because there are general principles that guide this. But I think it's good for the implementers to know what those general principles result in. And the other thing that we need to do, as Christian said, is work on an applicability statement and explain that this is for very specific environments where those trade-offs are good, and it's not necessarily replacing block 1, block 2 as the main way to handle bodies that are larger than the payload size.
Sure.
Mohammed, you were in the queue before. If you want to say something.
Actually, what I have is that we do already have a first version of the an applicability statement in the document, which basically say that this is not a generic, I would say, solution, and that we are targeting a very specific problem. So so this is we have a start text. If the working group wants to modify that to make it clear that there is no, say, confusion with the mainstream solution, this is something that we can work on and update as required.
Great, thank you. Christian, do you have any other comments on that, by the way? Just going back to your initial question.
No, not directly. I might have missed that part.
All right. So I think for all of us who participated on the interims, we tend to support the adoption of the document. I would really like, and also for myself, I would really like to use this humming tool that we have. So if that's okay with everybody, even if it is not the best tool out there. Christian, are you trying to send me something?
I was just pressing the wrong button. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So let's do a quick hum. Just for those who are not familiar, is the tab that you have there, some little bars next to the comments or next to the discussion, and you'll be a humming, which you basically, it's in Italian. So fortissimo means that you really are humming very strongly and you support it. Niente is that you're pretty quiet about it. So let's just start the hum right away. And unfortunately, I cannot hum as a chair, so neither Marco or I can hum. In the minutes, you can just count it as we are in favor for whatever that counts. And also, please, note takers, check the Jabber in case some people don't want to use the Miteco. So 14 seconds, excitement. Oh, yeah, sorry. Well, it's Italian also. It's using music, so only sopranos and tenor can answer. So, all right. So there is some interest, not a strong hum, but still a hum, a positive hum. And I'm sure that allegro non troppo. Yeah. So, but I think this is enough to adopt it as a working group document with the caveats that Mohammed and John have mentioned. Maybe you can share with us the version that you have. I at least haven't seen it, the one on the objectives of the document, the scope, and we can have a look. And maybe Christian, you can also provide the feedback you mentioned. Before we close it, like just any more comments, any thoughts? All right, so I think we will do the adoption then, and the authors will have to send a new version. Jon and Mohammed, we usually work with GitHub, so is it okay to work that way? We can set up a repo for you on our core working group GitHub repo. We do it for every draft these days, and basically also issues are tracked there. No need to ask for permission. Just go ahead and talk.
Yeah, so yeah, we have already I would say a version on the GitHub. So yeah, so if there is a working group repository, we can move to that repository. Yep. That's for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Karsten, you have some thoughts as well, some comments? I saw you there as well.
No, I just was saying that you setting up those repositories is a great service. So it really simplifies the work for the authors.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you.
You don't want to validate this on the mailing list, maybe?
Oh, yes, of course we will. I mean, yes, as usual, we will send to the mailing list and we will validate it there for those who haven't participated. I also thank you, Mohammed and John, for the patience. I just really wanted to have it in the in the group as well, because not everybody's attending the meetings, the interims. And yeah, thank you. You have presented these slides a few times already, so you must be tired of it.
That's fine, but thank you.
Thank you. So then we move to the next one. How are we on time, by the way? Just checking. 5:20. Okay, we have time.
5 minutes early.
Yep. Karsten, I just sent you a video again. It's actually, again, it stopped for some reason. If you want. There you go.
Okay. So, AIF, next slide. The authorization information format. That has a pretty weird draft name. It's called Draft Bomb and Core ACE AIF, because it really was originally meant as something that was submitted to both Core and ACE. And as you will see, that has been picked up by ACE now, but it's maybe also interesting for the core working group what's going on. So let's quickly talk about that. Next slide. So basically, this is about access control or authorization. These two words are synonyms. In information security, this is usually modeled by the access control matrix, which was introduced by Lamson in 1971. And that is a function mapping a subject and an object to a set of permissions. So it's a nice little abstract tool that says which permissions does a subject have on a specific object. And this is often sliced by object into an access control list. So on the object, you have the information which subjects can actually do what on this. This is a lot like Unix permission bits and so on. But what this draft does is the other way. We slice by subject and not by object. So we have a capability list, or C list, as it's traditionally called, that maps objects to sets of permissions. The formula itself doesn't do any security. It's not protecting this information. So the protection has to be done outside. There has to be some binding to a secure channel or some subject authentication verifier, a proof of possession token, and so on. So this particular draft is not concerned with that. This is concerned with the actual authorization information in there. Next slide. So we represent the C list in the simplest natural form, which is an array of pairs. So this is essentially the representation of a function. We could have used a map, but for various reasons, this is slightly more easy to use. So looking at the CDDL here, the generic AIF, depending on the type for the object identification and the type for the permission set, is just a sequence of 0 or more such pairs. And this generic thing, which is also used by other protocols like the MQTT profile of ACE, the generic thing is specialized to the REST situation by saying the object identifiers are really paths, URIs that are, or URI references is the right term, that are relative to the enforcement point, to the server that actually enforces these authorizations. And the permissions is just a number that serves as a set of bits. So the 2 to the power R is really what happens there. And the actual permissions are structured by COAP methods. So we have a permission bit for get, one for post, one for put, and so on until iPatch. That may be a bit coarse for some applications, but in many cases, this is a good basic way of doing permissions on some resources. Next slide. So one problem we have is that this is good for describing the permissions on static resources, resources that were known at the time the authorization information format document was created. But on IoT devices, we often have actions that lead to dynamic action resources. So these are essentially post results that are pointed to by a set of location response options. These, of course, happen dynamically. So getting a permission for each of them from an authorization manager would be very tedious. So the idea is to derive these permissions from the base resource, the resource where the post request was made on that led to the action resource. And we do this by just doubling the bits. So we have the same bits we just had. And these dynamic bits mean this is not for the base resource itself. It's not answering the question who can post to it or who can delete the base resource, which is something that maybe nobody can do. But it's about the action resource. And deleting an action resource, for instance, is convention for stopping an action that is going on. So you might not be able to delete the base resource, but you should be able to delete an action resource that you actually created. So this requires the enforcement point to actually remember who created a particular resource, and then it can just apply these dynamic bits. This is a bit like the NFS v4 ACL inheritance scheme. At least it reminds me a little bit. So this is not a completely new invention here, but I think it should essentially do another 20%. So what I described on the previous slides was 60%, and this gives us another 20%. So we have an 80% solutions and can say we are done. So next slide. This document has been around since 2014. That came out of the DTF work, and it actually was listed as a formative contribution at the ACEBOF at IETF 89 in London. So this has been around for a while, and people have generally looked at it, nodded, and then gone to the next thing because they didn't need it at the time. But in the ACE working group, it now looks like we actually can use this. And there is a working group adoption call going on right now that actually ends today. So if you like the thing, you can still put in your opinion. And even if you don't like the thing, you still can put in your opinion. In the adoption call, one question came from Benjamin Keddock. What else exists like this? So I think we need to do a little bit more research about other places where we send around authorization information in such a way. This is probably limited because most web servers have much more complicated authorization schemes. So they don't have a set of pretty much static resources like an IoT device has. The IoT device has a sensor value and maybe a couple more things, but you don't grow a new sensor or something like that. This makes a lot of sense for sensors and actuators. It may not make a lot of sense for a website, for Wikipedia or something like that. But of course, yes, the question is, once we have done it, it may attract other users, and we should make sure that we understand these users and don't do something stupid that would hamper those users. So tomorrow in the ACE meeting that starts at 11 a.m. world time, I think we will conclude the result from the adoption call, and please go there if you have an opinion on how AIF could be used outside ACE, or what else could be used with it or instead of it.
Carsten, if I might chairhead off. So I think the AIF pattern is very similar to that used in IPSO in OMA, right? Like when you have the resources and you have the operations that you can do on each of them. We don't use co-op methods like get, post, put, delete per resource, but we use this abstraction to CRUD operations. But as co-op is the underlying protocol, I guess it can be used in a similar fashion. But it's not exactly like this, but it's related in case you want to have another point.
So maybe it's worth actually writing this up and explaining how a more general CRUD level abstraction would map to these bits. So you don't need a new registration for permission bits just because they are named differently.
Oh, yeah, I mean, for OMA, I think in the long run, if they use something like this mapping would have to exist anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Current mapping is basically to the existing co-op methods. There is the intention to add other application layer protocols like HTTP and MQTT. I don't know the process or the progress on the latter, but at the end of the day, at least as far as OMA goes, everything maps to CRUD operations.
Okay.
But anyway, it's food for thought, another pointer there. Any more comments, by the way? Is this the last slide?
This is the last slide, yes.
All right.
Christian Amsus, how would you envision, is there some room still for extending this in such a way if you say that the dynamic permissions apply to the entity that created these dynamic resources, to apply dynamic permissions to entities that did not create that resource? Is that something that's kind of within reach from here, or is this something that would need another value for the generic parameters?
Well, since this is a capability list that just talks about a single subject, it's hard to make any statements here that span multiple subjects. So that would be a significant extension.
It would not necessarily span that particular, it would not go from inside that same document, but it would rather go state something like dynamic resources that were created from here that someone else created. That would be a phrasing that's more in line with the split of the whole permission space.
Yes. So we have lots of bits we could use. So if you go to the previous slide again, you see that I actually started with 32 for the dynamic get, just to be able to simply accommodate any future co-op methods that is being registered. And of course, we could start at 64 for dynamic other get or something like that. That could easily be done, yes.
Yeah, I mean, an easy way to look at what Christian is talking about is there's a difference between things I did create and things I could have created.
Yes.
But the other thing I wanted to look at too is there's also a time limiting factor on this. So for example, if I use this to create a pub subtopic, my token and therefore my permissions will run out presumably long before the pub subtopic itself is removed. So there is also some time issues that we need to look at too, where is this the same subject coming back again so that we know that they do have the dynamic access.
Yeah, so the management of subject identities over time, that is of course a very interesting issue, and that's probably something that we really should be discussing in ACE. But yes, so this token may be time limited, and it goes away, and with that the AIF information goes away, and then the client gets a new token, and maybe with a new temporary identity. And then, of course, it wants to get back access at things it earlier created. So this is maybe more about managing identities than managing the authorization itself. But there are many ways to slice this cat. So maybe we should make some examples for that.
Definitely.
So we can continue this discussion tomorrow, I think. We do have this on the agenda, right?
Right now, but I'm going to go put it on the agenda if it isn't.
Okay.
And I need slides too.
Yeah, you can just steal those slides.
It's probably saying yes, not to the microphone. Okay, so thank you, Carsten. Anybody else? Any comments? Any thoughts? Because if not, then we have the rare occasion in which we are ending quite early. It's 5:35, so we still have 15 minutes to go. We can use the flex time for whatever the group wants, or we can just cut it early. I mean,
Jaime,
yeah,
we actually have the possibility to pull in a document from the Friday agenda.
Yes.
That is also already uploaded in the data tracker, and Francesca can cover.
Perfect. So Francesca could be presenting, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes.
From her screen? Great.
So I should share my slides, or can you do that, Jaime?
If you could do that. If you have them already, I don't have to look for them.
Yeah, but you need to stop sharing so I can request.
Yeah. Just a second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Give me a second.
No hurry. Okay.
Okay, and let me start video as well, because why not? Hi, everybody. So I need to move this. And then you should be able to see the slides. Full screen, yes. Okay, so this is about a new draft about combining EDOC and OSCORE. So this started from a discussion in IETF106, and now that EDOC has been adopted in Lake, I thought it would be the right moment to bring this up again. So these are my co-authors. Yes, so first of all, this is about reducing the number of round trips that it takes to run EDOC and then an OSCORE request. And of course, we're talking about EDOC over co-op. This is why or I am bringing this to core. And also to answer a question from Jim that he posted to the mailing list. Yeah, so Lake is scoped to produce one lightweight AIC. And since this is about running EDOC over co-op and then OSCORE, I thought this is more in scope of core. We can discuss about that. And also I wanted to highlight the fact that this document proposed optimization on how to run EDOC and OSCORE, minimizing the number of round trips, but it is totally possible to also run EDOC and OSCORE sequentially as described in this slide. So you can see there is a co-op client sending message 1, EDOC message 1, EDOC message 2, then there is some EDOC verification, then EDOC message 3 sent. So I skipped the EDOC verification for message 1 and 2, obviously. And then after the server has verified EDOC message 3, both client and server can derive OSCORE security context, and all of this is described in the EDOC document. And then after that, the client can send an OSCORE request and receive an OSCORE response. So this is how, following the current EDOC document and the current OSCORE document, one can run EDOC and OSCORE over co-op. But we were wondering, can we optimize these 3 round trips exchange. So by moving the OSCORE security context derivation after the ad hoc verification, and then moving the ad hoc verification after the first OSCORE request, we can actually merge these two messages, because both co-op client and co-op server have all the material they need. So basically, what would happen is that a co-op client would send ad hoc message 1, receive ad hoc message 2, and then it would verify the ad hoc message 2 and produce ad hoc message 3. And at the same time, since it has everything it needs, can also do an OSCORE security context derivation and use this OSCORE security context derivation to protect the OSCORE request. And then the co-op server receiving this combined message would first have to process the ad hoc message 3. And then once it has passed verification, it can derive the OSCORE security context. And then it can finally process the OSCORE request and respond with a response. So I don't know if there is, we can probably take questions at the end. But yeah, so this document talks about different options on how to send these two messages together. So there are two options. One is to send an ad hoc message inside an OSCORE message, and the other one is send an OSCORE message inside an ad hoc message. So I remember last time I talked about this in IETF106, I did not have slides, and I was asked if we could have figures and diagrams. So I have figures now, so I hope this is better. So what does it mean to have ad hoc in OSCORE? So basically we have, this is a representation of a co-op message. We have a header, options, payload, and OSCORE message is defined as a co-op message that contains an OSCORE option. It also has some dummy method in the header, for example, and deciphered in the payload, there is a ciphertext. The ciphertext is the payload of the co-op message. So if you want to transport the ad hoc inside of an OSCORE, then you would have to put the ad hoc message in the payload as well. But if we have OSCORE message inside the ad hoc message, so the ad hoc document describes that the ad hoc message 3 would have to be a specific post message to a specific URI path, in this case ad hoc, with the payload being the actual data that is message 3. And if you want to do OSCORE in this message, then you also have to add the OSCORE option and ciphertext, because those two together include the whole request, the OSCORE request. So just checking if there is any comment. Yeah, dummy placeholder, yes. So then there is the question how to signal which one of these it is. So it can either be signaled in a new co-op option in both cases, which would be different things in both cases, or it could be, for example, signaled in the OSCORE option in the case where ad hoc is sent inside of OSCORE, or it could be signaled based on the number of elements or even a specific content format. So I'm going to go into details about that. So first of all, for the ad hoc message inside of OSCORE, we could define a new co-op option, in this case called ad hoc, that is basically telling the receiving endpoint, or in this case, or actually the server, please process ad hoc before you process OSCORE as you normally would. So this option would have to be processed before the OSCORE option, and that's a hard requirement. And then the server would extract ad hoc message 3 and then pass the rest of the co-op message to the co-op processing that would go through OSCORE processing. Okay, and then the other option is to actually add something in the OSCORE is called flag byte. So in the OSCORE option itself, that indicates that the payload contains both the ciphertext as usual, but also message 3. So the difference would be that an implementation would go through OSCORE processing and would have to recognize this bit in the flag byte, and would have to extract EDOC and then run the EDOC processing. So the EDOC processing would start from the OSCORE processing instead of being before, like in the first option. Okay. Then if we go to the next, if we have OSCORE in EDOC. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
The EDOC message is self-delimiting. So you know what size it is.
The EDOC messages are around 20 bytes. So it depends if it's RPK or certificate. So, but we can assume that they are, in some cases, it can be as low as 20 bytes.
Yeah, but when looking at the message, do you know when it ends?
Oh, yeah, you know, yeah, it's a CBOR encoded.
Okay, thank you.
EDOC message 3. Yes, sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, then I would say number 2 is the thing to do if we have enough bits left, because it comes at 0 cost.
Yeah. Yeah, and did you want to say something?
No, you answered the question. I'm fine.
Okay. Okay, so then the other option is that, yeah, for signaling, if we have an EDOC message to signal that the payload also include, and it needs to include OSCORE option and ciphertext, then we would either define a new co-op option, or which is basically the same as the other, but the meaning is different. So the meaning is the payload contains both EDOC and OSCORE option and ciphertext. And another option is to, we either say the endpoint, the EDOC handler, resource handler receiving this message should recognize that this payload has 3 elements instead of, so this would be a CBOR array of 3 elements. So it should recognize that it's not only EDOC message 3, but it also contains OSCORE option ciphertext. So it can recognize, okay, this is a piggybacked OSCORE request on the EDOC. And you could also possibly register, or we could also possibly register a new content format, let's say EDOC OSCORE, that would indicate that the payload is a CBOR array with these 3 elements. And so these are the options that are described in the document right now. And the OSCORE, it's worth noting that this option, the option number 2, is the one that would save the most bytes, because you would not have to define a new co-op option like in option 1, and that, and also because you're not using a specific URI path as you would have to in the option 3 and 4, because because in option 3 and 4 basically you would have to send a specific post to a specific URI, and that is all defined in EDOC. Also, this URI path right now is a well-known resource, and we could also talk about this is quite long, so it could be shorter. You would have to maybe define a resource type if you don't want to have it as a well-known resource. But yeah, this is the option 2 is the smallest of the option. And I see people, Göran, did you want to say?
Yeah, just one comment. I just realized if it's a get observe, then you will have the dummy or the placeholder method would be fetch. So that works. Yeah. But how does that work in case 3 and 4?
Well, that doesn't matter, because the ciphertext actually contains the request method. The dummy method is anyway dropped. So
but you're not supposed to do. I mean, the reason why we have fetch. This is an.
It doesn't matter. It's going if it's OSCORE going into a EDOC message. This OSCORE option and ciphertext would have to be extracted, and the new co-op, like a co-op message would have to be constructed from just the option and ciphertext. And the ciphertext should include also the URI and the method. Because the method is encoded. Yeah, Christian, go ahead.
Christian, I'm strongly in favor of one of the first options. And Göran's comment highlights one of the troubles here, that is that the response that would come back from a shape 3 or 4 would not be a response to that request itself, but to the request that's packed in there and might need to be encapsulated in there. And then we are starting building both the request and the response inside some encapsulation, whereas with patterns 1 or 2, the response is a plain response to what is in the request options and payload, and the ad hoc processing is not something where you need the complete co-op message build. So you could just take that byte buffer, pass it on as an implementer to whatever processes ad hoc, and then be done with it.
So that's sorry, go ahead.
One suggestion that I'd like to add just to the mix of 1 and 2, maybe as a 1B, or maybe that was already considered, is to just put the ad hoc message inside an option, inside that ad hoc option you suggest in version 1, because this is something you would only do if the ad hoc message is short. And if that is significantly longer than everything else, so as long as this all fits in one frame, you're good. And if it doesn't, you can just split it up anyway.
I'm not sure that 20-byte option is small enough to be a good sized option.
As far as I wouldn't know why not.
Okay, I think we're over time, but it should not kick us out before in 4 minutes.
You have 3 minutes or so, so please wrap up anyway.
Maybe Francesca, just before you continue your presentation, because I guess you are intending to get someone to review this, right? The target of this presentation is to get people to look at the draft and review, right?
Yeah. So this is already super helpful comments and feedback, and this was the goal of the presentation today, is to get feedback and reviews, and then hopefully we can pick one option and progress it. And I think from the feedback today, I think we're all converging to one of the first 2 options and possibly the second one. So this is great. I just wanted to. I have one slide left.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that before the time runs out, we should ask the group for concrete reviewers, basically.
Yes, if anybody is willing to review.
Queue for reviewing thing here.
Yes.
Queue up.
So we have Jim. Note takers, please, if you are still there. Christian and Jim have volunteered to review. Also Karsten. And the chair will be pinging you.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
No, please continue, Francesca. Sorry.
I just have one slide left, and this was about something that is not in the document, but Jim brought up, and it was about using multi-part core to optionally send all of these payload together with different content formats. And I think this option has the same problem as Christian brought up. But yeah, I wanted to put it in it. And also, it adds some more bytes, because you would have to have bytes for each different content format, for ad hoc, OSCORE, option, OSCORE, ciphertext, or possibly combined. So this is not our favorite option. So yeah, just wanted to mention that we have considered that. And that's it for me. If anybody has more comments, please. Also, I'd like, if Klaus is here, also about length of, or Karsten maybe can say something about length of options. Otherwise, I'm done. Thank you.
All right. So I think this concludes the session. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember that you have ACE tomorrow. Thank you, Francesca. Again, sorry if I didn't mention it before. Oh, sorry, Christian. Are you sharing something? No?
No, sorry, wrong button again.
All right. So again, thank you very much for coming. We will see you again on Friday at the same time. And yep, we will take all the items we took on the list. And I think that's all I can think right now. Marco, any other comments?
Nothing else.
All right. So
Talk
thank
to
you
you on
guys.
Friday. Thank you.
Yep. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.